He had everything. Millions in the bank. Hotels across Europe. A life most people only dream about. But Daniel Carter was empty inside. And the reason? He carried a poison in his heart he didn't even know was there. A prejudice so deep, he almost walked away from the only woman who could save him. This is the story of a man who had to lose everything he thought mattered to find the one thing that actually did. A story about a heart that learned to see. And trust me, by the end, you'll understand why love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about becoming the right person. Stay with me. Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you about a man named Daniel Carter. At 38 years old, Daniel had everything the world told him to want. He owned a chain of luxury hotels across Europe, drove cars most people only saw in movies, and lived in a penthouse in London that overlooked the Thames River. His life was perfect on paper. But inside, Daniel was empty. Here's the thing about Daniel that nobody really knew. He carried something dark in his heart. Something he didn't even realize was there most of the time. You see, Daniel had grown up in a wealthy family where certain things were just understood. Unspoken rules about who belonged in their world and who didn't. And one of those rules, whispered in country clubs and passed down through generations, was about black women. They simply weren't considered. Not as partners. Not as equals. Not as possibilities. Daniel didn't hate anyone. He would have told you that himself. He just dismissed them. Looked past them. Like they were invisible in his world of champagne and business deals. It was wrong. Deeply wrong. But it was all he knew. Then came that summer evening in Paris that changed everything. Daniel's old friend from university, Thomas Beaumont, was celebrating his 50th birthday at a rooftop garden in the heart of Paris. The Eiffel Tower sparkled in the distance. Soft music filled the warm air. Beautiful people in expensive clothes laughed and danced under strings of golden lights. Daniel stood by the railing, a glass of wine in his hand, feeling bored. He had been to 1,000 parties like this. Same people. Same conversations. Same emptiness. And then she walked in. I wish you could have seen her the way Daniel did in that moment. She wore a dress the color of midnight blue, simple but elegant. Her skin was rich and dark, glowing under the soft lights. Her hair was natural, pulled back in a way that showed off her face. High cheekbones. Warm, intelligent eyes. And the way she moved, confident, like she knew exactly who she was and didn't need anyone's approval. Daniel's heart did something it had never done before. It stumbled. Actually stumbled in his chest. He tried to look away. That old voice in his head whispered, "Not for you. Not your type." But his eyes wouldn't listen. They followed her across the terrace as she made her way to the bar, ordered a drink, and stood there alone, looking out at the city. For the first time in years, Daniel felt nervous. His hands were actually shaking as he straightened his jacket and walked toward her. When he reached her side, he cleared his throat. "Good evening," he said. His voice came out softer than he intended. She turned to look at him, and up close, she was even more beautiful. But it wasn't just her beauty that struck him. It was something in her eyes. A quiet strength. A depth that made him feel like she could see right through all his money and success to the man underneath. "Good evening," she replied with a small smile. "I'm Daniel. Daniel Carter." He extended his hand. She took it, her grip firm and warm. Grace Okonkwo. Grace. Even her name sounded like poetry to him. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" Daniel said, immediately regretting how ordinary that sounded. "It is," Grace agreed, looking out at the Paris skyline. "Though I've always thought these parties have too much show and not enough substance. Everyone's performing. Nobody's really present." Daniel blinked. Nobody talked like that at these events. Most people were too busy trying to impress each other. But here was this woman speaking truth like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're absolutely right," he said, surprised by his own honesty. "I was just thinking the same thing before you arrived." "Were you?" She looked at him with curiosity. "And what role are you playing tonight, Mr. Carter?" The successful businessman? The charming guest? He laughed. Actually laughed. Is it that obvious? Always is, she said with a gentle smile. I'm good at watching people pretend. They talked for hours. Daniel forgot about everyone else at the party. They talked about cities and dreams, about the loneliness that comes with success, about books and music and all the things that make life worth living. Grace told him she was an architect, that she designed buildings that served communities, not just wealthy clients. She spoke about creating spaces where people could feel safe and seen. Daniel found himself sharing things he never told anyone. The pressure he felt. The walls he had built around his heart. The way success had isolated him from real, human connection. When the party began to wind down, Daniel didn't want the night to end. His chest felt tight with an unfamiliar feeling. Was it fear? Excitement? Hope? I really enjoyed talking with you, Grace, he said quietly. Could I have your number? Maybe we could continue this conversation sometime. Grace studied his face for a long moment. Daniel felt like she was looking into his soul, deciding if he was worth her time. Finally, she nodded and gave him her number. Later that night, sitting in the back of his car as his driver took him home through the Paris streets, Daniel stared at her name glowing on his phone screen. Grace Okonkwo. Something had shifted inside him. Something fundamental. The man who had spent his entire life dismissing women who looked like Grace had just spent the most meaningful evening of his life with one. And he couldn't stop thinking about her. He didn't know it yet, but his whole world was about to change. His heart was about to learn what it means to truly see another person. And that lesson would cost him everything he thought mattered while giving him everything he never knew he needed. Daniel couldn't sleep that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Grace's face kept appearing in his mind. Her words echoed in his thoughts. That small smile. Those intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through him. He had met countless beautiful women in his life. Models. Actresses. Socialites. But none of them had affected him like this. None of them had made him question himself. Made him wonder who he really was beneath all the wealth and success. 3 days after the party, he finally gathered the courage to text her. Just something simple. I haven't stopped thinking about our conversation. Would you like to have dinner with me? His heart pounded as he waited for her response. Minutes felt like hours. Then his phone buzzed. I'd like that. But somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can actually talk. Daniel smiled. Of course, she wouldn't want some fancy restaurant where they'd be interrupted every 5 minutes by people who knew him. He suggested a small bistro in a quiet neighborhood, family-owned, no cameras, no crowds. That dinner turned into another. Then walks through Paris gardens where they talked until the sun set. Then weekend trips to small towns where nobody recognized Daniel's face or cared about his money. Daniel learned that Grace was brilliant. She had studied at Cambridge, worked for a prestigious architecture firm in Lagos, and now ran her own practice designing affordable housing and community centers across Africa and Europe. She didn't just talk about making the world better. She actually did it. Every day. More than that, he learned about her heart, her patience, her ability to listen deeply, the way she cared about people that society overlooked. She told him stories about growing up in London as the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, about facing subtle racism in professional spaces, about having to work twice as hard to earn half the respect. Daniel listened, really listened, and felt shame creeping through him. Shame for all the times he had looked past people like Grace. Shame for the privilege he had never questioned. Shame for the prejudice he had carried like invisible baggage. But Grace didn't make him feel judged. She just shared her truth. And in doing so, she invited him to examine his own. They were falling in love. Daniel knew it. He felt it in the way his day didn't start until he heard her voice. In the way her laugh made him feel lighter than he had in years. In the way her hand in his felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. But love, especially love that crosses the lines society has drawn, never comes easy. The first sign of trouble came from his business partner, Richard Thornton. They were having lunch at an exclusive club in London when Richard leaned forward with a concerned expression. Daniel, we need to talk about this woman you've been seeing. Daniel's jaw tightened. Grace. Yes, Grace. Richard said carefully. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but you need to think about appearances. Our investors are traditional people. Our clients expect a certain image. What image is that, Richard? Daniel's voice was cold. Richard shifted uncomfortably. You know what I mean. This just isn't, it doesn't fit. People are talking. Let them talk. Daniel. I said let them talk. Daniel stood up, threw his napkin on the table and walked out. But inside, his stomach churned with anger. Not at Richard, but at himself. Because part of him, a small, ugly part he hated, understood what Richard meant. That was the world Daniel had grown up in. Those were the unspoken rules he had followed his whole life. The real breaking point came 2 weeks later at a charity gala in London. Daniel arrived with Grace, her arm linked through his. She looked stunning in a gold dress, her natural hair styled beautifully. Daniel felt proud walking beside her. But he noticed the stares, the whispers, the way some people's smiles didn't reach their eyes when they greeted them. They were standing by the bar when Daniel heard it. A woman's voice, not even trying to be quiet. Daniel Carter with her? What is he thinking? This has to be some kind of phase. He'll come to his senses eventually. The words hit Daniel like a slap. But what hit harder was the realization that he once would have been one of those people. He once would have thought the same thing. The shame of it nearly broke him. Grace heard it too. He felt her body tense beside him. She started to pull away, to leave, but Daniel caught her hand. Don't, he whispered. Please don't go. Then he did something he had never done before. He turned around, faced that woman and everyone watching, and spoke loud enough for the whole room to hear. If anyone here has something to say about the woman I'm with, say it to my face. Right now. Because I'm done with whispers. I'm done with polite racism. Grace Okonkwo is brilliant, kind, accomplished, and beautiful. She's more real than anyone in this room. And I'm honored that she chose to be here with me. Silence fell across the ballroom. You could have heard a pin drop. Some people looked away, embarrassed. Others stared in shock. But Daniel didn't care. He only cared about Grace. When he looked at her, there were tears in her eyes. But she was smiling. Later, standing on the balcony outside, Grace touched his face gently. Why did you do that? Because you deserve to be defended, Daniel said simply. Because silence is agreement. And I refuse to be silent about loving you. Loving me? Grace whispered. Daniel took her hands in his. Yes. I love you, Grace. I'm in love with you. And I don't care who knows it. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and Daniel felt like he was finally, truly alive. Love should have been simple after that night. Daniel had made his choice. He had stood up publicly. He had declared his feelings. But the truth is, transforming a heart doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in 1,000 small battles, day after day. The backlash was immediate. Articles appeared in society magazines questioning Daniel's sudden change in preferences. Business associates began distancing themselves. His mother called from the family estate in the countryside, her voice tight with disapproval. Daniel, darling, what are you doing? This woman, she's not suitable. Think about the family name. Think about your father's legacy. I am thinking, Mother, Daniel replied quietly. For the first time in my life, I'm actually thinking instead of just following rules I never questioned. But I love her, Mother. Either you accept that, or we have nothing more to discuss. The phone call ended with his mother in tears and Daniel feeling like his world was splitting in two. The old life on one side, Grace on the other, and him trying to bridge a gap that felt impossibly wide. The hardest part wasn't the external pressure, though. It was the internal battle. Those old thoughts, planted deep in childhood, didn't disappear just because he wanted them to. Sometimes, in weak moments, Daniel would catch himself thinking, is this worth it? Would life be easier if I just... But then he would see Grace's face, hear her laugh, remember the way she looked at him like he was more than just a wealthy hotel owner, and he would hate himself for even having those thoughts. One evening, sitting in Grace's small apartment, so different from his penthouse, filled with books and art and life, Daniel finally broke down. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice shaking. "Something I'm ashamed of." Grace put down the tea she was making and sat beside him, her hand finding his. "There was a time," Daniel continued, staring at the floor, "when I would have walked right past you. Not because of who you are, but because of what I was taught. Because of the color of your skin. I would have dismissed you without even knowing you. And that makes me sick." The silence that followed felt eternal. Daniel couldn't look at her, terrified of what he might see in her eyes. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Daniel?" He shook his head. "I see a man who is learning, who is trying, who chose to change even when change is hard. I don't need you to have been perfect. I need you to be honest. And you are. That's what matters." Daniel looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "How can you forgive me?" "Because you're not the same man you were," Grace said. "And because love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone willing to grow." She was right, but growth was painful. Daniel started reading books Grace recommended about race and privilege. He attended events in Grace's community, listening to stories that made him uncomfortable because they revealed truths he had never considered. He learned about microaggressions, about systemic inequality, about the daily exhaustion of being Black in spaces that were never designed for you. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, Daniel's understanding deepened. This wasn't just about loving one woman. It was about seeing the world differently, about recognizing his own privilege and choosing to use it for good rather than just for comfort. But the world wasn't done testing them. 6 months into their relationship, Daniel's former girlfriend, Victoria, appeared at one of his hotel openings. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed, everything society expected a man like Daniel to want. She approached him with a practiced smile. "Daniel, darling, I've missed you." "Victoria." His voice was cold. "What do you want?" "Just to remind you of what you're giving up." She gestured toward Grace, who was across the room talking with the architect about the building design. "You're making yourself a spectacle for what? A woman who doesn't even fit into your world." Something snapped in Daniel. All the growth, all the learning, all the internal battles crystallized into a single moment of absolute clarity. "You're right," he said quietly. "Grace doesn't fit into my world. She's too good for it. Too real. Too kind. She's everything this shallow, empty world isn't. And I thank God every day that she chose to love me despite where I come from." Victoria's face twisted. "You'll regret this." "The only thing I regret," Daniel said, "is not becoming this person sooner." He walked away from her, toward Grace, and didn't look back. That night, lying in bed with Grace asleep beside him, Daniel realized something profound. He had spent his whole life building hotels, creating luxury spaces where the wealthy could feel comfortable. But Grace had done something far more important. She had built a space in his heart where he could finally feel human. The prejudice he had carried wasn't gone completely. Probably never would be. It was too deeply rooted, too generationally embedded. But every day, he made the choice to fight it. Every day, he chose Grace. Chose love. Chose to be better than the man he was raised to be. And that choice, repeated over and over, was transforming him from the inside out. One quiet Sunday morning, cooking breakfast together in her apartment, Grace turned to him with a serious expression. "Daniel, I need to ask you something. Are you prepared for this? For a lifetime of people judging us? Of defending our relationship? Of fighting battles that shouldn't even exist?" Daniel put down the spatula, took her hands, and looked into her eyes. "I'm prepared," he said, "to spend every day of my life proving that loving you is the best decision I ever made, whatever that takes." Grace smiled then, that beautiful smile that had first captured his heart in Paris, and Daniel knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The seasons changed, and so did Daniel. Not overnight, not easily, but steadily, like a river slowly reshaping the landscape around it. He started making changes in his business. He hired Grace's firm to redesign several of his hotels, incorporating community spaces that served local residents, not just wealthy tourists. He began scholarship programs for Black students studying architecture and hospitality management. He used his wealth and influence not just for profit, but for purpose. People noticed. Some praised him. Others accused him of virtue signaling, of only making changes to impress Grace. Daniel learned to live with the criticism because he knew the truth. These changes were real, and they mattered. But the greatest change was happening inside him. There was a moment, about 8 months into their relationship, when everything clicked into place. They were visiting Grace's family in Lagos. Her parents had been welcoming but cautious, clearly protective of their daughter. Her father, a retired professor, had watched Daniel carefully throughout dinner. After the meal, Grace's father invited Daniel to take a walk through their neighborhood. As they strolled past houses and shops, children playing in the streets, Daniel's father-in-law spoke quietly. "My daughter is the best thing in my life," he said. "Her mother and I raised her to be strong, to be proud of who she is, to never settle for less than she deserves." "I know, sir," Daniel replied. "Do you?" The older man stopped walking and looked at Daniel directly. Because loving a Black woman when you're a white man isn't just about romance. It's about recognizing that her experience of the world is different from yours. It's about listening when she tells you about pain you'll never feel. It's about defending her even when it costs you something.
Can you do that?
Daniel met his eyes, and for the first time, he answered without hesitation. "I'm learning to, sir. Grace is teaching me. And I promise you, I will spend my life trying to be worthy of her." Grace's father nodded slowly. "That's all I needed to hear. That you're trying. That you see her. Really see her." That evening, sitting on the balcony of Grace's childhood home, watching the sunset over Lagos, Daniel felt something shift in his chest.
Peace.
For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely at peace with who he was becoming. Grace came out to join him, 2 glasses of wine in her hands. She sat beside him, their shoulders touching, comfortable in the silence. "Your father talked to me today," Daniel said. "I know. He does that with everyone I date." She smiled. "What did he say?" "He asked if I could really see you. Not just love you, but see you." "And can you?" Daniel turned to face her fully. "I see a woman who is stronger than anyone I've ever met, who faces prejudice and ignorance with grace, no pun intended, that I'm still learning, who builds beautiful things that serve people who need them most, who chose to love a man who didn't deserve her but is trying every day to become someone who does." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "Daniel, I see you, Grace. All of you. And I'm grateful every single day that you let me." They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. But love stories aren't complete without one final test. 2 months later, back in London, Daniel faced his greatest challenge yet. His mother had requested a formal family dinner. Daniel knew what was coming. His mother, his siblings, his uncle who sat on the board of his company, they all wanted him to end things with Grace. To come to his senses, as they put it. He brought Grace anyway. The dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as Daniel feared. Polite conversation that felt like walking on glass. 4 smiles. Loaded questions directed at Grace about her exotic background. Daniel's jaw ached from clenching it so hard. Finally, his uncle cleared his throat. "Daniel, we need to discuss the future of the company. The board has concerns about your recent associations." "Her name is Grace," Daniel said coldly. "And she's not an association. She's the woman I love." "Be that as it may," his uncle continued, "we have to think about the family business, the legacy." "Stop." Daniel stood up, his hands flat on the table. "All of you, just stop." The room went silent. "Do you know what I've realized?" Daniel's voice shook, not with fear but with conviction. "I spent 38 years trying to live up to a legacy that was built on exclusion, on looking down at people who were different, on maintaining walls that should never have existed in the first place." "Daniel," his mother began. "No, Mother. I'm done. I'm done pretending that wealth makes us better than others. I'm done with polite racism disguised as tradition. I'm done caring more about what society thinks than about what's right." He reached for Grace's hand. She took it, her fingers intertwining with his. Grace has shown me what real strength looks like. What real grace, he smiled slightly, looks like. She's made me a better person. A better man. And if choosing her means losing the family business, losing this legacy, losing all of this. He gestured around the formal dining room. Then I choose her. Every single time. His mother gasped. His uncle's face turned red. But Grace squeezed his hand, and that was all Daniel needed. They left that house together, walking out into the London night. Daniel's phone started buzzing immediately. His uncle, his siblings, his mother. He turned it off. You might have just lost everything, Grace said softly as they walked. Daniel stopped, pulled her close, and kissed her forehead. No, he whispered. I just figured out what everything actually means. And in that moment, standing on a London street with the woman he loved, Daniel Carter was finally, completely free. 6 months after that dinner, Daniel stood in a small jewelry shop in Lagos. Not a luxury boutique, not a famous brand. Just a small shop run by a local artisan Grace had introduced him to months ago. He was looking at rings. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with gentle eyes and skilled hands, watched Daniel carefully examine each piece. This one, the man said, pulling out a ring Daniel hadn't seen. I made it special. The gold comes from here, from our land. The diamond is small, but perfect. No flaws. And see this pattern carved around the band? It's an Adinkra symbol, Sankofa. It means learn from the past to build your future. Daniel stared at the ring, his eyes burning with tears.
It was perfect.
Not because it was the biggest or most expensive, but because it meant something. It told a story. Their story. This is the one, Daniel whispered. This is exactly the one. He proposed 3 weeks later, but not in some grand public way. He proposed in Grace's apartment, on an ordinary Tuesday evening while they were cooking dinner together. Grace was laughing at something Daniel had said, her hair tied up in a messy bun, wearing old jeans and one of his shirts, and he realized he couldn't wait another moment. Grace, he said, his voice cracking. She turned, saw him on one knee, and froze. I was a man who couldn't see, Daniel began, his prepared speech suddenly feeling inadequate. I walked through life blind to my own prejudice, to my own privilege, to what really mattered. And then you walked into that party in Paris, and it was like someone turned on the lights. Tears were already streaming down Grace's face. You didn't just teach me to love you, Daniel continued. You taught me to love better, to be better, to see the world through eyes that actually care about people instead of just protecting my own comfort. You showed me that real strength isn't about building walls, it's about tearing them down. He opened the box, the ring catching the light. I know I'll mess up. I know I have a lifetime of learning ahead of me. But I want to do that learning with you. I want to build a life that means something. I want to raise children who never have to unlearn the hatred I was taught. I want to spend every day becoming a man worthy of your love. Daniel's voice broke. Grace Okonkwo, will you marry me? Grace sank to her knees in front of him, taking his face in her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes. They held each other on that kitchen floor, the stove still on, dinner forgotten, both crying and laughing at the same time. The wedding took place 8 months later. Not in London. Not in some exclusive venue. In Lagos, in Grace's home city, in a beautiful outdoor space that Grace's firm had designed, a community center that served as a gathering place for local families. Daniel's mother came. After months of silence, she showed up the day before the wedding, her eyes red from crying, and asked Grace for forgiveness. I was wrong, she told Grace, her voice breaking. I let fear and tradition blind me to what my son could see clearly. You make him happy in a way I've never seen. You make him good. And I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize that. Grace embraced her, and Daniel watched 2 of the most important women in his life begin to heal the wounds his family's prejudice had caused. The ceremony itself was a blend of traditions. Grace's Nigerian heritage mixed with Daniel's British background, creating something entirely new and beautiful. As they exchanged vows under the African sun, surrounded by family and friends from both their worlds, Daniel felt the last chains of his old life fall away. "I promise," he said, his voice strong and clear, "to spend my life seeing you, really seeing you, to listen when you speak about experiences I'll never fully understand, to defend you when the world tries to diminish you, to raise our children to be proud of every part of their heritage, to use whatever privilege I have to open doors that were closed to people like you, and most of all, to love you with everything I am, every single day." Grace's vows were just as powerful, just as moving. She spoke about finding love in unexpected places, about the courage it takes to change, about building a future on truth instead of tradition. When they kissed, their guests erupted in celebration, a mix of languages, cultures, and joy that felt like a glimpse of what the world could be if people would just open their hearts. Years later, Daniel would tell their story to their children. How he almost missed the greatest gift of his life because of prejudice he didn't even know he carried. How their mother taught him to see the world differently. How love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every single day. His hotels became known not just for luxury but for inclusion. He and Grace built a foundation that funded community projects across Africa and Europe. They spoke at conferences about interracial relationships, about confronting privilege, about the work of unlearning hate. But the most important change happened in quiet moments. In the way Daniel listened when Grace talked about her experiences. In the way he taught their children about both their heritages with equal pride. In the way he used his voice and his platform to amplify people who'd been silenced. Daniel Carter wasn't a perfect man. He still made mistakes. Still had moments where his old conditioning tried to resurface. But every day, he chose love over fear. He chose growth over comfort. He chose Grace again and again and again. And in choosing her, he found not just a wife, but a purpose. Not just a partner, but a path toward becoming fully human. That's the thing about real love. It doesn't just change your heart. It changes everything.
The end.
Thank you for listening to this story. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen not when we find something new, but when we finally learn to see what was always there, waiting for us to be brave enough to embrace it. May we all have the courage to tear down the walls in our own hearts.